In what ways does your media product use, develop, or challenge forms and conventions of real media products? In our media product, we try to include many different conventions of typical thrillers. Although originally I looked at different genres including Western, horror, and romance, I decided that I had the most ideas for creating a thriller opening. I felt that I could create some interesting ideas to include in the film opening in order to create suspense and tension. When looking at the different subgenres of a thriller, I found that a psychological thriller fitted the ideas I wanted to use in my film opening quite well. Typically in thrillers, directors tend to use women who are often subject to misogynistic abuse, threatening humiliation or murder. I used this idea to create suspense in my film opening and to let the viewer know that some horrible event would happen. We used most of the typical thriller conventions in my opening, including an engaging plot, a villain, and a victim. The typical prop of a weapon, in this case a knife, an eerie and isolated location, eerie music, low-key lighting, and lots of close-up shots. When researching typical iconography associated with thriller films, I found that knives are symbolic as they have connotations of blood, death, and pain. This was necessary to include in the film opening in order to portray the brutality of the murders that the villain was committing. I also researched iconic sounds associated with thrillers. I found that typical eerie music may be used to create suspense and keep the audience on edge about what could potentially happen in the story. Jumpy, dramatic and scary music are played in many scenes as they produce different moods and settings for thriller films. I used a fast-paced piece of music to match the fast and furious shots of the man hacking at the victim's body. I also found that some pieces of music that are used are quiet pieces which are soothing, but they have a beat to them, and the beat is consistent throughout the whole piece of music. This type of music can have the opposite effect, and the audience may feel as if everything is very calm and relaxed, and if something happens that makes the audience jump suddenly, this music may pick up this fright, as the audience weren't expecting it. This type of music can cause a lot of tension and the tone and atmosphere, so I had to look at some different pieces of music which incorporated this calm pace. Although one piece fitted quite well with the film opening, it still wasn't fast enough to create that panic and tension that I wanted to create within my target audience. I looked at many different film openings to gain inspiration for my own. I looked at and analysed the opening of Seven, The Dark Knight Rises, Delicatessen, Dexter, Brick and Kill Bill. In the Seven opening there are lots of short clips shown, including extreme close-ups of objects, such as silver tools in the actor's hands, whilst the credits are flashing up. This was also evident in the opening to Dexter, which was interesting as the close-up shots were quite suggestive, bordering on a horror, if all was not revealed at the end. I tried to incorporate lots of close-up and medium close-up shots within my film opening to add to the specific details of what the murderer is doing and how he is preparing to murder his victim. The lighting in the Seven opening sequence is very dark, adding to the ominous tone throughout. Also, a sepia wash has been used over the whole sequence, along with a black and white effect, adding to the time period of the film. Although I originally played around with the idea of adding a sepia wash over my film opening, I found that it gave the effect that the film was very old-fashioned, rather than a current psychological thriller. I did, however, use low-key lighting similarly used in Seven to create an eerie atmosphere and overall look to the shots. There are no long shots in this title sequence, so it doesn't really allow the viewer to see what's fully going on, reinforcing the mystery of it all. Again, I use this technique within our film opening, so that the audience aren't necessarily aware of what's exactly going on. I use fast-paced shots showing how the murderer sets about stalking and going after his victims. I developed forms of the Seven opening by including interesting action shots, giving more depth and substance to the opening. I was also intrigued by the way the Dark Knight Rises opening has been created. Similarly to Seven, the Dark Knight Rises opening has lots of close-ups of important objects and characters. I liked how the credits have been used within the opening, such as a credit floating on the water and on the ice. I tried to use this idea by having one of the credits of my film opening appear as though it was floating in a glass of water and ice. Although the use of the photos of the characters alongside their names in the Dark Knight Rises opening is effective, as it gives the audience an instant insight into the style and tone of the film. Although I would have liked to have done that, I found that it would have taken away from the eerie tone of the film opening and away from the objective of it, to show murder taking place. There is blue tinge to the Dark Knight Rises opening, and I have noticed that this type of effect in all of the film openings I've analysed. It is evident that each film has its own style. For example, Delicatessen has a sepia effect and Kill Bill is in black and white. For our film opening, I played around with many different effects. I found that increasing the contrast and the brightness of many of the shots created a ghostly effect to the film opening. This allowed the shots of the deep red of the red dye at the beginning, and also of the victor's body, to become more vivid and disturbing. I also looked at the different effects that could be used for the shots of the girl running. After looking at effects such as a black and white and a blurred edge effect, I found that the dream effect looked the best, once again creating a ghostly white appearance, giving the impression that it is a flashback. The way that the opening credits to Delicatessen was done interested me greatly. The opening sequence to the film was done in a one-shot camera movement around a room, tracking over various items and artifacts that show the credits on them. The entire sequence is kept within one colour scheme, a sepia tone, giving an old, worn and dusty feel to the film. I like the idea of writing some of the credits on items that correspond with the person's job. For example, the director of photography is written on a camera. It made the opening sequence to Delicatessen more interesting and entertaining by giving parent text with the item in the frame. I really wanted to include this type of credits within the actual film opening. However, with Delicatessen being a black comedy rather than a thriller, I had to be careful about making the overall look of the film still tense and creepy. I used different fonts for the different credits used throughout my own film opening. Some of the fonts were quite harsh and bold, giving connotations of power and destruction. I also included the actual murderer's handwriting, which was again quite harsh and jagged. This created a tense feel within many elements of the film opening. I had to make sure that the way the credits were placed within the film opening, that they had an eerie effect that I was after, and were placed with relevance to the plot of the film opening. How does your media product represent particular social groups? I represented the thriller genre by the use of a typical murderer and victim, the use of low-key lighting, eerie locations, and some horror-based props. Although originally I set out to create a creepy and suggestive thriller opening, the ideas have developed in order to account for the target audience's needs. We decided that the opening requires some gory shots of the victim's body being hacked up in order to maintain the audience's interest. I feel that this worked well as it created a disturbing and captivating opening. The murderer in my film opening is typical of an antagonist, as he has the mysterious and creepy elements that are seen within many different murderers in films. This is reinforced by the fact that only shots of his eyes, hands and feet feature in the film opening. The boots that the murderer wears are meant to look quite old and with a dirty appearance in order to create the idea that the murderer has had the boots for a long time, perhaps wearing them every time that he kills. Also, the dirty plaster on his hand was meant to be significant of the fact that the murderer is getting his hands dirty about the type of person the murderer is. Old-fashioned props such as the sewing machine, the safe and the tobacco box give the audience the impression that the murderer has been around for a while, perhaps planning and preparing to kill all of these people. It also suggests that he could be quite wise and therefore clever enough to cover his tracks. It is evident that he has developed habits over the years. For example, he keeps a small souvenir of each of the victims. In this case of the film opening, it was a piece of one of the victim's organs. It is also evident that the murderer has taken the time to stalk his victims in order to create a collage of photos. His obsessive nature shown towards each of his victims implies that he has some kind of mental disorder, perhaps as a result of staying inside and plotting the murders for so long. The helpless female character is also stereotypical of a victim and protagonist, as she is unable to control the situation and can't do anything but run. The clothing that the girl wears is meant to appear quite simple and not too expensive looking in order to get across the idea that the girl is average and hasn't necessarily had the best or most comfortable upbringing. She is just an average girl who has become the subject of a murderous obsession and compulsion. The two different locations that were used during the flashback scenes, where the girl was running away from the murderer, had an eerie, creepy and isolated feel about them. The location where the girl is running in particular is very bleak and again quite isolated, making it the perfect location for the girl to run. The bleakness of the location is reinforced by the dream effect that I placed on all of the flashback scenes. This created a ghostly white effect and made the victim look quite washed out and terrified at the prospect of what might happen to her. What kind of media institution might distribute your media product and why? I researched some different production companies in order to get an idea about the different types of production companies and the typical genres that they usually produce within a film. I found that the most suitable and appropriate production company who may be interested in the style of film that I was trying to create would be Hammer Films Productions. Hammer Films Productions are a British production company who specialise in gothic hammer horror films, but also produce sci-fi, thrillers, film noir, and comedies and some TV series. They were founded in 1934 and were financially beneficial in their most successful years, when they dominated the horror film market between the mid-1950s until the 1970s. I also looked at other production companies, including 20th Century Fox and Fox Searchlight Pictures. I found these, however, to be too unsuitable. 20th Century Fox is a US film production company whose most successful productions are the Star Wars saga, the Chronicles of Narnia, and Avatar. They seem to produce more of the fantasy style of films rather than proper thriller horror style. Also, Fox Searchlight Pictures are a low-budget production company who specialise in independent indie and British films. This again would have been unsuitable, as I would not want a film opening to be mistaken for something with more of an indie genre style to it. When researching different iconic directors associated with thriller genre, I came across many, including Tarantino, David Fincher, Christopher Nolan, and Alfred Hitchcock. Tarantino is an American film director who has directed many popular thriller films such as Pulp Fiction, Kill Bill, Death Proof, and Reservoir Dogs. Tarantino is known for his famous collaborations and styles combining into one. David Fincher is also an American director. His most famous work includes Panic Room and The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Christopher Nolan is a British-American thriller director whose plots often reflect the mental construction of the characters, as in The Dark Knight, The Prestige, and Inception. Finally, Alfred Hitchcock was a highly influential director and producer who pioneered many techniques in the suspense and thriller genres. He directed The Birds in 1963, which was named the scariest movie of all time. Hitchcock has been given the name the Master of Suspense. It was after Saboteur in 1942 that the Hitchcock's fame as a director grew, and people began to refer to his films as Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho and Alfred Hitchcock's Family Plot. Alfred Hitchcock also directed the very famous Psycho in 1960. He uses suspense in the film Psycho by alternating between different shot types to create a longer cinematic time. He used this technique in the shower scene in Psycho. It was interesting to see just how these different directors came to be so well known, and also how they established themselves. It is evident to me that each director and production company have their own style and conventions that they include within all of their films, creating an individual and original approach to their work. I think that a production company such as Hammer Film Productions would distribute my media product, as I have focused on the subgenre horror thriller, using conventions of the genre in order to portray the key aspects of a thriller. However, what I think makes our opening interesting is that we have incorporated a traditional approach, yet have included some interesting plot twists which are evident in the opening. Who would be the audience for your media product? Originally, I decided that my film's certificate rating would be a 15. The reason as to why it would be a 15 is because it would include some content that may not be viewable to those below the age of 15. The age 15 certificate states that it could include bad language and blood within the film, something that may not be acceptable for younger viewers. The 15 rating is very similar to the aged 18 certificate, rarely for a younger age, as it includes more appropriate things. Therefore, my film would not be able to include anything too graphic. However, it would be allowed to showcase the eerie and murderous atmosphere that I would want to be portrayed in the film. However, after putting all of the new footage together, I decided that we had to add in some gory shots. These consisted of the murderer hacking a lamb's liver, the victim's body, apart. I noticed that the film opening instantly became more disturbing and inappropriate to watch for a 15-year-old. Therefore, I decided that the film opening would be more suitable for 18 years and over. The aged 18 certificate states that the film has the potential to include basically anything inside it, including drugs, sex, alcohol, weapons, blood, violence, etc. 18-year-olds and above are seen to be mature enough to watch the film. I like the 15 rating, which is more acceptable for the audience, as it includes less inappropriate content. The 18 rating tends to include a lot of graphic content. Saying this, a 15 rating could still be appropriate to the film, as it is only ever suggestive content, not any actual shots of a body being hacked apart. Before actually filming the opening, I talked to my target audience. When specifically watching a thriller movie, the audience expect to see particular elements within the film. Thrillers can be based on the fear of the unknown. They can include someone who has dual personalities, murderers, or mentally unstable. I asked some people in the age range of 16 to 19 years old of what they would expect from a thriller film. These comments included a twist at the end of the film where everything becomes apparent to the audience, to be kept in suspense, adrenaline rush, lots of tension. I expect to be drawn in and enticed by the film and its plot. Here are some actual people talking about what they would expect from a thriller opening.
What I would normally expect from a thriller is
suspense, tension, fast-paced music, blood, knives, an antagonist, a protagonist.
Similar to horrors in the way that they can make you jump and such. They keep you into the film the whole time.
Fast and tense music.
Fear.
The whole point of a thriller is you don't get bored.
I also created a survey which allowed me to clearly see exactly what my target audience were looking for in a thriller opening. Overall, it is evident that most people expect to be shocked and experience fear when watching thriller films. From other research that I've done, it is also evident that the majority of teenagers prefer the clever effects shown in the openings of films such as Seven and The Dark Knight Rises. This definitely influenced my choices over my storyboard for the film opening. I used my audience feedback in order to identify the props, location and costumes that I would use to make sure that I got the correct atmosphere for the opening, as well as ensuring that I included tension, suspense and mystery. Roland Barthes identified 5 codes for narrative theories, with one being the Enigma code. This refers to an element of a narrative which is not explained and raises questions amongst the audience. I've tried to establish different puzzles within the opening in order to create suspicion about what's going on. How did you attract and address your audience? I looked into all of the different ways that I could attract my target audience and draw them into the film opening. These included lighting, music, the props and the different camera shots, movements and angles. The location that we chose for the murderer's secret lair is quite eerie and atmospheric. Low-key lighting was used to add to the contrast between his preparation inside shots and of the outside shots, where a ghostly white effect is used. When shooting the shots of the man's eyes, I made sure that half of his face was darker, giving connotations of a mysterious side to him that the audience have yet to find out. Although it is evident that he is committing many murders, it suggests to the audience that there is another side and aspect to his character. When framing particular shots, such as the shots of the man preparing for the murder, I made sure that the prop being used was the subject of attention. I tried different types of lighting, including a spotlight, in order to highlight the importance of the props being used. Also, with a low-key lighting effect to many of the shots, the brightness used within some shots, such as the hacking of the victim's body, allowed the audience to feel more disgusted by what they were watching. The lighting also created a more vivid yet surreal image, bringing out a disgusted sensation in audiences. Throughout the film opening, the man hacking at the meat was quite suggestive of the victim's forthcoming murder, creating an unbearable suspense while viewers waited for the inevitable. It is evident that the film opening borders slightly into the horror genre, with many of the shots being quite suggestive of body parts being hacked up. The attention to detail in making small things suggestive of main plot ideas is perhaps what makes the audience want to carry on watching. For example, the subtle references to time running out for the victim is seen throughout, such as ink and blood dripping, a sewing machine sewing, candle wax dripping, sand running through an hourglass, scissors cutting, the murderer tapping his foot, and then to signify the girl's death, the man blowing out a candle. This gives clues and sets up the narrative for the rest of the film. Also, the idea of the psychological mystery behind the murderer's intentions to kill the girls creates suspense and evokes an intrigue into the twists of the story. It also forces the audience to examine the actions and motives of the murderer in order to distinguish their backstory as a way of figuring out the plot. I looked at many different types of music to find a piece which created enough tension within the opening. I found one piece of music which had a fast pace at first, but slowed down to create a slow and more eerie tone to it. Although it was an interesting piece of music, it still wasn't fast enough to create that panic and tension that I wanted to create within my target audience. I finally found another piece of music which had a good and consistent beat throughout, and had a creepier and more eerie tone to it. This allowed the film opening to be intense and to engage the audience more. The opening basically follows the murderer's activity in his preparation for a murder of one of his victims. There are lots of close-up shots of how the killer tracks down his victims and creates his murder plan. Throughout the opening, there are shots back and forth between the murderer and the victim, who is running for her life. Typical shots used in the thriller genre in films would be close-ups, extreme close-ups, high and low angle, and also tracking shots. These shots usually produce suspense and apprehension within the audience. I have tried to incorporate the majority of these types of shots in the film opening in order to create the same effect. The way the shots were placed in sequence was very important to the film opening. The male gaze is a concept which deals with how an audience views the people presented. For feminists, it can be thought of in three ways: how men look at women, how women look at themselves, and how women look at other women. Male gaze and feminist theorist Laura Mulvey developed the term male gaze in 1975. She believed that in film, audiences have to view characters from the perspective of a heterosexual male. This is relevant to my film opening, as the shots of the male murderer's eyes and face are intercut with shots of the helpless female victim. This is suggestive of the murderer either thinking about what happened, or it is a flashback to the actual event from his perspective. This creates a fear in audiences, as they can see exactly what the murderer's intentions are.
In their film, they used music really well. Like, your new music that you used was excellent. It went really well with the clips, and it just helped build the atmosphere really well.
You get very sudden, shocking image at the same time as very loud music. It creates a lot of suspense.
Some of the shots that are in the film, quite stereotypical to a thriller.
Has fast-paced music and shows two characters on screen, one of which is obviously the antagonist using graphic images of cutting meat.
Yeah, we saw close-ups of specific and relevant objects to the film.
Jumpy kind of shots.
The protagonist is shown to be running away, as is obviously displayed as a victim, obviously creating an ideology of tension and a thriller.
What have you learnt about technologies from the process of constructing this product? During the creation of my media product, a film opening, I have learnt a lot about the different types of technology that I have used and how they have helped to improve the overall quality of my film opening. During the process of creating my product, I have used a variety of different types of technology, including the internet, a camera, a camcorder, a tripod, lighting, and various types of software such as iMovie, GarageBand, and QuickTime. The internet was immensely helpful to me during this project, as I used it throughout my research and also for the creation of my blog, which allowed me to document the work that I had done. The internet was very useful when researching about thrillers and how I could apply the conventions to my own opening. I did detailed research about conventions of thrillers, aspects of the thriller genre, and also other actual film openings, which I thought relevant to planning my own opening. I used YouTube in order to research different film openings to find aspects of them that I liked, including the opening to Seven, Delicatessen, and many others. I also used the internet to find the piece of music for my film opening. I went onto the website freeplaymusic.com and eventually found a piece of music that fitted perfectly within the opening and wasn't copyrighted. Another aspect of the internet that was particularly important to me was my blog. On my blog, I was able to document all of my research and planning and show it in a clear and concise way that wouldn't have been achieved if handwritten or typed up in an essay form. The blog also kept track of the skills and experience that I had developed throughout the production and post-production stages of creating my film opening. In order to create my film opening, I purchased a good quality camcorder and tripod. I've learned a variety of shots and ways to use the camera to my best capabilities. I know how to set the camcorder up with ease and how to position it to create the best effect when filming. I use a tripod for the majority of the shots that I filmed to keep the camera steady in order to get maximum quality out of my shots. For shots such as a tracking shot, using the tripod created a swifter movement, allowing me to use a variety of different shots within the opening. Although there were a few problems with the fact that the tripod only reached a small height, I managed to get around that by placing it on tables and benches to get the desired height and angle. This has benefited me because I now know the range of shots I could accomplish by using other objects to help me with the shots. I used different types of lighting to focus on the shots that I was filming. I specifically used a spotlight which helped me with the contrast between light and dark on the murderer's face and also on the shots of the meat. The lighting created a more vivid and disturbing image of the meat, as the light reflected off of the blood, creating a glistening effect. I also had a camera with which I used to photograph each of the props for the purpose of my blog. I also used the camera to take photos of the victim in order for the murderer to create a scrapbook of photos that he had taken of her when he was stalking her. In order to edit my film opening, I used an Apple Mac. I used various types of software available on the Mac, including iMovie, GarageBand, and QuickTime. I used iMovie to edit the film. I downloaded all of the shots to the software, and then I chose the footage that I wanted to edit and edited the film opening together. I found the piece of software very useful when it came to creating different effects, such as the dream effect for the outside shots, and also for making smooth transitions between each shot. For this, I either used a transition effect or I used an effect which smoothed out the overall shot, if it was a bit shaky. This was a great help as it created a more professional appearance to the film opening. When editing the shots together, I was able to be specific specifically selective about how much of the shot could be deleted, down to 0.1 of a second. This again created more of a concise overall look. I also edited the music in iMovie. I found this to be very effective as I could match the music exactly to each shot, making it match and fit with the opening. For my evaluation, I used iMovie to record some people talking about what they would expect to see in a thriller film, and also how well they thought that I had incorporated the conventions of a thriller into my own film opening. I used GarageBand on the Apple Mac in order to record my voice for this evaluation. I selected a new track and recorded each question separately, and then inserted it into iMovie as an MP3 file. On iMovie, I was then able to edit which bits of the soundtrack I wanted for which parts of the evaluation. I also used QuickTime to record my movements on the Mac. I was then able to insert, for example, me changing the effect on one of the shots. I then edited this into the evaluation whilst I was talking about the different effects that I used, so that it was clear to the viewer exactly what I was doing. Looking back at your preliminary task, what do you feel you have learned in the progression from it to a full product? Looking back at the preliminary tasks that I have completed, I feel that I have learned a lot about the thriller genre, how to film shots properly, how to use a tripod effectively, how to properly light a shot, amongst other things. I have developed my knowledge about the thriller genre, including plot, characters, mise en scène, music, sounds, lighting, camera shots, angles, and movement. Working in the group to do the preliminary task allowed me to be part of team decisions. However, I did find that some of our ideas clashed, and therefore it made it difficult at times to work as a team. For our film preliminary exercise, we had to make a short film by editing a character opening a door, crossing a room, and sitting down in a chair opposite another character, with whom they then exchange a couple of lines of dialogue. This task had to demonstrate match-on action, shot-reverse shot, and the 180-degree rule. In my group, we created a murder mystery scene in which a murderer greets a woman situated in a dark room and talks to her. She then presses play on a tape recorder and listens to a woman responding. At the end of the scene, the audience finds out that the woman sat in the chair opposite the murderer is actually dead. We had to create a storyboard for our film prelim, which included the shot type, camera movement, the edit between the shots, the shot number and sequence, and any dialogue, sound effects, or music that occurs in the scene. We did include some conventions of a thriller in our prelim. In our evaluation, we identified that the audience of our media product would range from teenagers to adults who have an interest in murder mysteries and eerie atmospheric style dramas. We attracted our audience by imposing a cliffhanger and lots of suspense in our murder mystery by not revealing the plot. We also incorporated a sense of drama to draw the audience in. I feel that our plot for the prelim was probably our strongest element of the prelim. We experienced several technical difficulties during the process of creating the prelim, one of which was a problem with the settings on the camcorder. Our location was quite dark and this resulted in quite a grainy picture. We struggled with the settings to try and fix this, and we also encountered a problem with the sound on iMovie, and therefore we couldn't make the background music fade out for the dialogue to come in. Although this was frustrating, we did learn from our mistakes, and this knowledge was extremely useful for when it came to filming and editing the actual film opening. I made sure that I knew how to use my camcorder properly and how to set up each shot. I spent a lot of time trying to get the lighting just right for each shot to improve on the grainy effect evident throughout the prelim. Throughout the filming and editing of the actual film opening, I also came across some difficulties. For example, when I went through all of the different shots that I have filmed and had eliminated the unnecessary footage, we realised that the sepia effect of the newspaper on the table didn't work. So we decided that we would have to refilm all of the shots that we had filmed in sepia and with the newspaper on the table. Also, some of the shots didn't quite work in relation to the thriller genre, and so therefore we decided we would replace some of the shots, such as the globe spinning and the map, with some other shots which related more to the murderous aspects of the film. This adaptation of the storyboard challenged my ability to be able to develop the shots in order to portray the thriller genre more effectively. However, I felt that the end result was very good in terms of the plot and how the characters were portrayed. For my actual film opening, I worked in a pair with another girl. Although at first we worked together effectively, circumstances meant that I had to do the majority of the work, including all of the shots of the murderer preparing to kill, some of the outside shots and the majority of the editing. I feel that the efforts that I contributed towards this project exceeded the time and effort that my partner was able to contribute. I feel that I've learned a lot about trying to work effectively with someone else, as I realised how much each of us should really have contributed. I have, however, developed my independent skills, which was necessary in order to achieve the best possible outcome for the film opening. The majority of the people who have watched my thriller film opening have understood my intentions for it, and have been able to read the narrative structure of the film well. Overall, I'm very happy with the result for my film, and I feel that I've learned a lot since the preliminary task.